Have you ever struggled with a child that needs to take a bath or shower, but seems to have a lot of difficulty actually getting in the water? Or maybe you have a kid that refuses to wear certain clothes, or another child that says they're not cold when you know it's a very cold temperature outside. Or a kid that like freaks out when they're hungry or thirsty and you don't know why they're so sensitive. A lot of your answer lies in understanding the way your child is processing their senses around them. Sensory processing plays a huge role in our children's behaviors and emotions, often in ways that we don't even initially realize. In this episode, I sit down and interview not one, but two occupational therapists, and we talk about sensory processing differences, what they are, how they impact children's emotions, and especially what we as parents can do to help. Welcome to the Enlightening Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hamblin, and I am so excited for today's guests, Carrie Carman and Jen Papasodoro, the OT parent coaches. Welcome, ladies. Can you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thank you. So good to be here. This is Jen, and Carrie and I are the OT parent coaches. As the name suggests, we are OTs and we are parent coaches. And in addition to that, we've been OTs for a long time in the area of pediatrics. We used to work in the schools together. That's how we met. And really reformed the OT parent coaches because we saw the importance of really enlightening, empowering, informing parents so that they can be the ones who are really supported, because they are the ones supporting their children all the time.
Fantastic. I love it.
I'm Carrie,
Yes.
and everything Jen said, and also I'll add that I have two teenage sons, 14 and 16.
Before we even get into sensory processing differences, can you just spend 30 seconds telling us and reminding everyone of what sensory processing is?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about sensory processing in a nutshell, the most efficient way to think about it is it's how we take in information, interpret it, and process that information from our senses, and it's how we respond. Basically, there's the 8 senses. Some people might be more familiar with the 5. The other 3 are vestibular, which is a movement and balance sense, proprioception, which is a muscle and joint sense, and then interoception, which is a sense where that helps keep our bodies in that optimal state of balance or homeostasis. And there's receptors on all of our organs and gives us information about what we need, noticing those signals from the different senses, and then giving meaning to them. So noticing, oh, my stomach's grumbling, and then giving meaning to that, I must be hungry, and then taking action, I should probably eat. And that's really a foundation. That sense in of itself is really a foundation for self-regulation.
Yes.
And if you think of all the senses as a pyramid and all of them are at the bottom and learning's at the top, it's really a foundation for all learning and daily activities.
I love that. Yes. We have a few episodes on sensory processing and how it influences emotion. So I'll include those links in the show notes. They're episodes 56 and 57. But from what I understand and what all of the research I've done has supported is that our senses are communicating to us if things are safe or not. And if our senses are communicating subconsciously, of course, that something's not safe, there's a chance that we're going to go into one of our more protective emotions like anger, frustration, anxiety, worry, fear more quickly. And sometimes we don't even know why. Usually we don't. Right, because it's like a nervous system to brain connection, not a thought brain connection. Okay. So this is really important for anyone wanting to raise an emotionally healthy family to kind of understand their child's sensory processing differences and how they influence their kid and what we can do about it. So this is a fantastic conversation. I'm excited to jump in. Let's start with SPD. People probably have heard it or seen it online somewhere. What does it mean and how is it helpful and how is it limiting? Big question there.
Sure. So sensory processing disorder is really, at this point, not necessarily, it's not defined as official medical diagnosis. It's not in the DSM or it's not an ICD code yet. And it's often associated with autism, but not always. It's more helpful to think of it as being descriptive, meaning that it's indicating that the process of integrating and responding to sensory information is presenting as a challenge for a person in their everyday lives, more than just small differences that you're able to respond to or accommodate or manage without a lot of support. So it's that's how I would describe it, is like if you have maybe hypo or hypersensitivity to something, whether you have a high or low. So basically thinking about thresholds, a particularly high or low threshold for information, for sensory information in either one or many categories, and whether that need or threshold you have is met in a way where you can actually satisfy that enough throughout a period of time or throughout the day. So you want to think of it that way, and sort of a neurological threshold on the one hand. On the other hand, there's other difficulties that can be in the sensory category, which would be things like being able to determine the differences of things, like the qualities and characteristics. That's what would be considered discrimination, sensory discrimination. So being able to discriminate between different sounds or visual cues or tactile information, right?
Okay,
So
I have a child that will eat steaming hot food and not realize it until their mouth is burnt.
So
and
the
once
temperature,
the mouth is like burnt, they're like, oh, I've been eating, but it might be 2 or 3 bites in. So we spend a lot of time teaching the kid what to do with the food to make sure it's safe before they eat it. So that would be an example.
And we could talk, that's great. We could talk about those examples too, of like what kind of things you can do to help develop that sense for that person, that actually involves both like the mouth receptors, so like the taste and the smell involved with that, and the tactile component, also the internal interoceptive sense, because that actually hits on that one of those specific elements of interoception is the sense of pain or temperature. So and those are obviously separate but intertwined in some ways. So that touches on that, and there are ways that we could talk about ways to address that with someone to kind of help them develop that if they're not noticing. So I guess back to thinking about SPD, it can be helpful because it can describe that it's challenging for a person to be able to manage. On the other hand, it can be and it sort of tells that there's differences in that person's ability, like their way of taking in information and processing it. On the other hand, everyone really does have their own individual sensory profile, and there's no like ideal or right or wrong like profile, right? I mean, it depends on the world you live in, like the context you live in, and what kind of supports you have, and the environment that you're set up in, and the demands that are placed on you in your daily life. So it's not so helpful in the sense of labeling it that way, because we all individually have our little differences of how we're taking in and interpreting, and how we respond if something feels a little different or uncomfortable or too much or too little. So if you think of it that way, and you sort of normalize the idea that we all have our own profile, like aversions, preferences, all the things. I don't know, Jen, if you want to chime in, but those are the thoughts that initially come to mind when I'm thinking about like the label, the topic, and what's helpful to think about it as like a diagnosis versus like understanding the differences, which we're going to talk more about today.
And something I always, sorry, Jen.
Oh no, go ahead.
I feel, for me personally, whenever we're talking about like diagnosis and having like an official word to describe something, it can be really helpful if it helps you understand your kid more. It's not very helpful if you think that's the end. So I'll show you really quick what we've been doing in the neurodivergent survival kit. This is one tool we use a lot. The iceberg tool.
Iceberg. Yep.
And so say we see a kid we have one of our community members has a child who refuses to wear a coat. So we'll see like the behavior. They're refusing to wear a coat. They go outside. They become very cold. They melt down. They scream. They hit. Maybe they're saying things that parents perceive as disrespectful. So that's all the things that we're seeing. And then there's a lot going on under the surface. And if all that we put on under the surface here is, oh, the kid has SPD, or the kid has PDA, or the kid has ADHD, and we just kind of put that label there, it's actually not very helpful, in my opinion. What's helpful is we go, oh, the kid has sensory processing differences, which means that under the surface, they don't feel temperature the same way you might. They don't know they're cold until they're freezing. You know, they have PDA, so that means they feel stress when you ask them to do something directly. So that's an analogy I really like to do. Like, this is what we're seeing for behaviors. And if that diagnosis becomes the only thing that you think about, it's not helpful unless it opens the door to consider why the behaviors are there. So
Right,
that's
I
an
love that.
analogy I really like to
Yeah,
use.
we talk about the iceberg constantly, and so we love that you're using that with the parents you work with. The thing I was gonna just piggyback on with that is that, yeah, when we give any label like that, sensory processing disorder, or even just saying sensory processing differences, it doesn't really, like you said, it doesn't tell us everything. So with sensory processing and someone's sensory profile, you can have a certain threshold for a certain sense. Like you could have a high threshold for a taste, like you said, like knowing, or a temperature, knowing that the food is hot. You don't really know until it's like super burning, like you said. But you could have a different threshold for a different sense, right? So you could really need a lot more input in another sense, like proprioception or something like that. And so just saying SPD, whether you're talking about disorders or differences, it doesn't tell you the specific picture. And sometimes that can be really hard to figure out, but we can speak to that and helping parents come up with some strategies for kind of pinpointing what patterns they're noticing in their own individual child, and what senses might be a little, have those higher thresholds or lower thresholds, and kind of what clues they can look at in just daily activities.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's one of the questions from one of our community members. How can I recognize which sense? I don't know if that she was asking for herself or for her child. I think both are important. How to recognize which sense is over and understimulated. And I love that you bring up it's really unique to each child. I have two kids that have ADHD and autism, so exactly the same diagnoses. But for one of my kids, their threshold for touch, it seems like it's limitless. Like they're always welcome to be back rub or touch or something to get some stimulation with that sense. But my other kid, like if I try to hug them, they're like, that was too much. Like, I mean, like a gentle, like shoulder pat. They're like, okay, I'm touched out now, and now I'm done. And exact same diagnosis, but very different.
Yeah, very different presentation. And that's really also a really good point that you're bringing up, that something I'm honing in on, and a point you're making is that it can be different in different contexts. It can be different based on your body budget. Like you said, you've talked about sensory cup, the amount that you've taken in throughout the day, or the demands of that moment, it can appear different. So people do get often very confused. We get, parents asking us or pointing out, like making the observation that, like, well, they sometimes do this, or they don't, or they can do it all the time, but then this one time they're saying it's bothering them, or they can't handle it. What's going on with that? Or they don't really believe them and all that. So that is, or believe them, because it just doesn't make sense. They're confused. So I think that's a really good point, is that the context matters. Also, in the same conversation here about sort of the label of a diagnosis of SPD, something to consider is that it can also, when your threshold is down, your neurological threshold is like lower, or your window of tolerance is smaller for some particular other reason. So say it is because of just like, it could be a situation where you're just generally, it's all involved with senses, but like you're generally tired or hungry or any of those things, or you've spent a lot of time, doing something that is requiring a lot of attention. Your threshold, if your threshold's lower already, you're more likely to have some of these, like, I guess, sensitivities or irritabilities, or like your threshold can change. So it's not always the cause of we've talked about this sometimes before with other folks, where it's like, it's not the sensory difficulties of processing are not always the cause of the dysregulation. It could be actually kind of a result of already being at that point of being dysregulated or about to be. And then those things are the things, because they're so innate in your system, and it's such an integral part. It's the way you're integrating everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Like sometimes I can handle it when my kids are loud, but if I'm tired and I didn't have a nutritious breakfast and I'm out of routine and I had a lot of things not go to plan, when my kids are loud, I'm a lot more likely to snap at them.
And it's also a tangible thing that people can, like, kids can know sometimes at that time. They can hone in on something bothering them because it's a sense, as opposed to an emotion that it's hard maybe to talk about or name or describe what they're actually feeling, but then that sense will be something that they can kind of grasp onto as being able, they can communicate that, this is bothering me, or stop touching me. It's like, well, that there might be under the iceberg some more other things that are that have caused that person to feel dysregulated, but that's the one thing that they can kind of hone in on.
Yeah.
So that I wanted to add. But do you want to go, so back to the question about how can we tell which senses are needing?
Yeah, I think this parent's questions is how can we as parents recognize which sense is over versus or over or understimulated?
So Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about the sort of the sensory, being a sensory sleuth and kind of helping to clarify or have like an approach to how you might look into that?
Yeah, we can. And Emily, I think you'll provide the link. One of our the gift that we're gonna provide your listeners is access to our sensory sleuth worksheet. So I'll speak to that a little bit in that process. But basically, we suggest that you take either a certain activity or a chunk of time. Some people like to, kind of thinking about what some parents like to look at, maybe an area that kind of is always in a struggle, like, oh, every time, bath time, or even more generally, even the morning routine or the evening routine or bed, it's always a thing. There's always something, and I'm not really sure what's going on there. So we say to take that moment, could even be a specific activity. Maybe it's the teeth brushing or something like that. So you can get as specific as you need to be, but take that moment, take that activity, and then we're going to have you kind of look at it from the lens of each of the senses. So you're going to, like I said, our visual can provide that visual structure for you. But even
can we do this with bath time? I know several community members have
yeah, for sure.
Kids that struggle
Yeah,
with
we can
bath
talk
time.
specifically.
Yeah, so we can use the example of bath time. Sure. So for example, bath time. So if you think of all of the senses involved in that, okay, temperature of the water, temperature of your skin before you get in the tub, right? The moment they, are they coming in without any clothes on, or they're taking the clothes on off before they get in the tub, or they're walking around for a while, undressed. So all those considerations, so temperature of themselves, temperature of the air, temperature of the tub, water or shower versus shower, that kind of input that you're getting going into the tub versus having the shower run on you. The smell of the products. So things like the soap, the shampoo, the conditioner, those kinds of things. Is that you're noticing any consistencies with that? The tactile input of the materials you're using, the bathrobe, the pajamas or clothes they're getting into afterwards, the towel. Maybe we think that's a really snuggly towel. Maybe they're not perceiving it quite as cozy. Maybe it's a little scratchy, or maybe it just came out of the laundry and it's warm or something like that. So considering all of those different inputs, even things like sounds, could be the sound of the tub running, the shower running, sounds in the bathroom, around the bathroom, the fan in the bathroom sometimes is more noticeable to some than others. Body positioning, so looking at things like their vestibular sense, particularly hair washing, can be a whole
head back
activity, right? Tilting their head back can feel very gravitationally insecure to a lot of kids. So thinking about, you're noticing that's when the going gets rough, right? Is it the hair washing? Is it the tipping back? And does that give you clues into that sense of their vestibular processing? So yeah, really just looking at each sense individually, making kind of some mental notes or jotting things down as you're going through the activity can give you some clues. You're not necessarily going to jump to kind of problem solving right then, but you're going in it with the idea of looking at noticing some patterns within that activity or that moment of time for each sense.
Oh, that's great.
Kind of notice, oh yeah, I'm seeing a lot of ticks in all of the, check marks or note marks in these areas. I wonder if I can dig a little bit more and do some experimenting and maybe make some changes next time and see what you notice. Or certainly if you're able to collaborate with the child, kind of collaborate. I'm noticing every time we tilt your head back, that seems a little tricky, and getting their perspective as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love this. So just a brief summary, they're going to get your freebie, which we'll have the link in the show notes, and they're going to zoom in on one particular moment. So we're not thinking overall in the whole day, where are they over or understimulated? It's in this specific moment. If it's
Place to
every
start.
day at meal times that they're dysregulated and we want to think about it from a sensory experience. Then we zoom in there and we go through each of the 8 senses to
That's one.
kind of
Yeah,
problem
that's
solve it.
one way, and that's what we were just talking about. And I'll add on that another option is sort of the reverse of that or inverse of that, which is, sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but the difference of flipping it a little bit would be taking one particular sense and looking across the day. So you might be saying, actually, I have this the sense that, or sense this, I've noticed, I have this inkling that there are some differences in this category, but I'm really confused about like why it's sometimes up or down or different in different contexts. So then you might take that, say you're going to look at the vestibular sense, they seem to be moving a lot, and then you're going to look throughout the day with that one sense, and you can just take chunks of the day or routines, as Jen was saying, or different contexts that you're in, and use
Okay.
that sense
Oh, I
throughout.
love
So
that.
kind of the difference there. You could do it however makes sense for your
Yeah, I have one kid
your
that
brain.
proprioceptive is very strong for that kid.
Yeah. So
Very
you can take that one
powerful.
sense, learn a little bit more about it, put that lens on of like, okay, the proprioceptive lens. I'm going to be thinking about the input that their body is getting or looking for in each context.
I
So
like
that's a
it.
different
And
way
so
to think
either
about
way,
it.
we're thinking like not trying to solve it all at once, but
Yeah.
we're going to zoom
Putting
in
in.
on one area, either a moment or a sense,
Mhm.
and then figure that, work on figuring that out. And then we can add more to it instead of trying to do it all at once. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. By the way, for bath time, I think for everyone listening, I just want to give some tips that have helped us or my community members with that, because it seems to be tricky for a lot of neurodivergent kids. Autonomy as much as possible, of course, collaboration with
Always
the kid. One mom, the kid gets to listen to a comedy show that they love.
love
And
it.
so they listen to that anytime they start to get ready for the bath. She puts on the comedy show in the bathroom. My kid, we needed to do for a while a space heater in the bathroom and get it at like just the right temperature. They gave the okay. We got the bath water at just the right temperature. And then I needed a bathrobe that the child chose. It was like
Exactly.
right by the bathtub. So once they got out, they put it on. And I think it lasted for about 3 years. They needed all of those accommodations. And then suddenly they were like, okay, I'm fine now.
Different phase. I love
Yeah.
that. I'm glad you've shared all those specific ones. And I've actually, each of those we've, recommended or used in different ways. And I was going to add to that sometimes the bathrobe I'm not sure if you're saying this, but instead of a towel, like
Yeah,
I
that's
offered
what
it
this
to,
child did.
okay. That's what I was talking about with a client actually recently was like, there's like a large plush robe instead of the towel. And they just kind of drape it and they actually sit on the floor on the mat for a bit before having to like dry off traditionally. Which has helped as well. And I just, when you were saying, I started to think about other ideas. Speaking of neurodivergence, is like one thing that might be that I was talking about with a parent recently was that we did some visuals for like basically almost like a storyboard of their favorite show, and they did like a visual, like, and laminated it and just had a couple cards in there that had their favorite scripts, and that way they could use, the child was non-speaking and they were able to use those scripts during the bath to interact with, because that's really something that regulates them, and they weren't able to have the tablet in the bathroom at the time playing visibly because they want to be interacting with it, but they found that using the visual, and the parent could use those scripts to practice with them on, not practice, but to engage with them and feel connected during the bath, was a really, really helpful strategy as well. So you can get creative with all sorts of accommodations.
Never would have thought of laminating scripts from a show. That's awesome. It's genius.
It was really good. And you got to get creative. I think that's the other thing too. I love the idea of really getting creative and taking it slow too. You don't have to do all the things for all the baths every time, right? I mean, for every bath, you can just get in there and be in the water for a bit. And, you don't have to just do all the steps every time if you need to scale it back for a bit. And because again, the other thing is it might not be one of these particular senses,
Right.
but the overwhelm when they're of the
All
collective.
combined. Yeah.
The collective input and demand that it sort of places on the body. Yeah.
I love that. And always a reminder to myself, because my brain will still sometimes pop up with this really unhelpful thought of, well, I don't need all of that when I take a bath or shower, and I didn't need it when I was a kid, so my kids shouldn't need it. And just the reminder to parents, like, yes, that's true. And, when a kid's interoceptive sense it might be different than mine. When I'm hungry, I feel like a little rumble in my stomach. But my kid might feel like there's dinosaurs jumping around in their stomach. Like it's just a very different sensory experience where, okay, I feel cold, but my kid's like, I'm freezing and I'm
I'm
getting
gonna die.
fire alarm signals that I
Right.
need to go in survival mode. Like
It
it's
feels
just a
like
different experience for the kid.
some people, and some might not notice at all and have a sense of that at all, and then have, like you said, the alarm at a certain point. They might not even notice or be able to describe how extreme it feels until their system is alerting them that it's too late and they're about to die, like you said. Like that system
Yeah.
feeling of life or death and safety and threat. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point.
Okay.
And
So
I
good.
think can I say something about being sensory aware as a parent, is that it's similar to sort of the emotional intelligence aspect of parenting, where we want to help our kids develop that. And it's the same thing with, like, basically in the sensory realm of modeling your own curiosities and noticing and like observations about yourself, and validating your own experience and someone else's experience, so that you are helping them understand the language of the sensory world, so that they're able to become familiar with the language, the concepts, the expression of it. And so it all starts with awareness, and how we can do that is becoming, curious and aware ourselves about
Oh,
sensory
that's
information.
great. Oh, I love that. I did that yesterday and didn't even realize that I was starting to feel dysregulated. We have a swing set in the backyard, and I said, I need to go cool off. I'm going to go outside and swing right now. Like I modeled that to my kids. I didn't realize it till now that that's what I
Yeah.
was doing. I was modeling
Good
sensory
job.
regulation. So,
Yeah.
and I did. I got on my little kid's swing and I got in there. Thankfully, it's a high weight limit, so I didn't break it. And I swam
Yeah.
for
No,
about
that's
3 minutes, regulated, and was
Awesome.
able to go back inside.
Yeah. That's a
These
wonderful
are,
thing to
yeah,
do.
these are things we do for ourselves. And I know you mentioned one of your listeners had a question about things to do for older kids. And like Carrie said, Carrie has older kids. I have my kids are young adults now. They're 22 and 25. And so, yeah, we both have that lived experience too, but and are still going through it. But yeah, you can do the same activity as far as being a sensory sleuth, to support any adult, any kid at any age. You can do it with infants all the way up to adults. And so just consider and again, if they're able to engage in some, proactive collaboration there, that's of course is always helpful to getting their input. But things, just thinking about their day, their preferences, things like, music that might be regulating in terms of supports. If we're jumping to supports, you can look at things like music, or we've worked with parents, or even noticed that friends of ours kids or our own kids, they go off to college, and they find that, it can be very overwhelming, especially those first few months, that first year. But then they've come to realize, or parents help them become aware of things that are regulating, going for a run, right? Making sure they eat, right? All those, even those basic needs, which support that interoception, which then supports the self-regulation, so that they're not getting overwhelmed. So you can really do this activity with anyone. With an older kid, you can even show them the worksheet,
We can
and
do it with
see
ourselves
what they
too.
notice.
With
We can do it
ourselves.
with
Yeah.
ourselves. Yeah,
Actually
exactly.
helpful. I would say helpful to do with ourselves, so we got a good understanding of it and, own it more. But that's a great point, is like allowing these things to kind of, like, putting it out there and allowing it to kind of marinate. I was going to say that sometimes, like, especially with older kids or teens or young adults, if it's suggested to you very directly, you're not going to, the knee-jerk reaction to, like, not take the feedback or the recommendation.
Yep.
But the modeling of it, and remembering that you still have that influence, even by just making simple observations, like, oh, like I noticed, oh, that really, like I noticed that snack really seemed to help, get everyone feeling better after we did X, or, something like that, where it's just a simple, neutral sort of declarative statement about, like, oh, that seemed to be good. Or I remember last time or even playing it out in your head. I remember last time I forgot my snack, so I'm going to make sure I, like, set a few by my bag before we leave later. Even if you're just doing that, like what you would have in your inner monologue or dialogue in your head, you can kind of just sort of say that aloud and not expect a response. You're not giving a direct suggestion or placing an expectation. You're just kind of letting people know how this kind of works, so that you're planting the seed for their brain to start thinking that way too. So don't put as much pressure on yourself about having to do a thing or solve an issue about their sensory. I feel that I have to remind myself all the time, but if we're modeling it, if we're creating that safe space to express it, that is an influence. That is creating an environment in which the other people around you will be able to then do the same work. So
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay.
I hope
Now
so.
this is quite a question from our community. I'm hesitant to ask it. And here's why. I know with my children who are in occupational therapy, whenever I go in for one of their sessions, it seems like there's always like something new that the occupational therapist is working on them. So I feel like the strategies are almost limitless. Like there's no end to the strategies. So I'm hesitant to ask this because it's going to be so big, but our parents in the community wanted to know there's two questions that I think go together. What are some things we can do at home for each of the senses to ease or prevent overwhelm?
Mm-hmm.
And in addition, what are some things that older kids can do on their own to help with their sensory regulation?
Yeah, those are two big questions, but they're great questions.
I know, I'm nervous to ask them because I'm like, oh, this could go on for 4 hours.
It's good to put them out there.
So we'll try to keep it concise and let people know it's a small answer to a big question.
Yeah, we have so many. And I was going to say, Jen, maybe I'll pass it to you in a moment. One thing that came to mind right when you were saying it was like to try to think of it as these categories, right? You want to think of like the environment, because we sometimes parents come up with the best ideas once you plant a seed of what type of things you're going for, right? So we don't necessarily have all the strategies and tips and tricks. It's like we collaborate with parents on that, because that's the kind of thing that they know best about their environment and what they're working with. So I would say the first tip that I have before I pass it to Jen would be that to think about the environment. Just think very, sort of analytically about it. Think about all the components of the physical space, the time, the equipment and materials. Just think through those things and have that lens on, because you'll be surprised at how many, I think, really great strategies or accommodations you could come up with when you're thinking of in that way. That's sort of a general, but Jen, do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I would just, echoing what Carrie says, it's so individualized, but if we get asked this quite a bit about just general tips, all the sensory systems are powerful in their own right, but one thing we have learned and continue to share is that you can get a lot of bang for your buck when in doubt, we say heavy work it out, right? And so the heavy work system is that proprioceptive system, and it is very powerful. And a lot of people so that's where you have these receptors on your muscles and joints, and you're getting.
So what are some examples of heavy work?
Yeah, so
kids carry heavy things or push furniture.
Yeah, so that push, pull, carry, input, jumping on a trampoline, right? Pushing, tug of war, that kind of thing. Pulling a scooter or a wagon, pushing
bear hugs,
bear walks, all of those things. Even yoga
bear hugs,
poses, those kinds of things. So, but also knowing that it doesn't have to be those big movement things too. Proprioceptive input could be playing with Play-Doh, or, trying to think of other,
like
sand.
stirring heavy,
like cooking, making a pizza, right? It could be using the sand there, the kinetic sand or something like that. So it doesn't have to be the big movements. It could be something little, like something at the tabletop, if that's helpful. But yeah, those it could be the big muscle movements or the smaller movements in the hand. It could be wrapping oneself up in a blanket, right? So just changing one little thing about the activity. So even, this comes up all the time, right? Video games, so they can be regulating, but then the threshold is always tricky about when to stop. So even changing like one little thing, like maybe they're doing it and maybe you can help them be more mindful of noticing what position they're in when they're playing video games. What if they're playing it on the couch snuggled versus like on a, kind of just sitting on the floor, right? Maybe on the couch, they're getting that much more input, and it could be helping support their proprioceptive system a little bit more. They're getting that much more calming input and regulating input. So there are endless activities, but proprioception would be maybe a direction to look at to help, again, kind of narrow that focus. It almost always it works because that sense is so strong in the way that it does regulate and kind of provide both a calming and or alerting sense, but in a way that it can be very self-regulating.
Okay, that is great. And I also feel like this question would be answered as we become the sensory sleuth, and we are curious about the 8 senses, that sometimes the answer almost becomes obvious when we realize, oh, my kid's touch threshold is probably really high.
That's right.
Yeah, just you're noticing.
Or it's low, yeah.
Okay. Or their budget, like you said, we talked about before, is like if it's particularly low, then this is something that they tend to have difficulty managing or have complaints about. And then other times that is not, or it's the opposite. Like you say, it could be. And also, if you think of each sense and like sort of like a toggle of like between like not noticing and noticing a lot, that could be helpful too, to sort of think through that, because it's going to be variable and it's going to be different it could be high on one and low on another and all that.
Yes.
So yeah, you really need to kind of be a detective, sleuth it out, and equip yourself with those ideas about what you could troubleshoot.
That's fantastic. And I think modeling can never be overdone. Like I don't think I have autism or SPD. I do think I have ADHD, and I still try to model as much as possible for my kids. And I see a huge difference. I've told the story before of one of my kids where we were rushing to Christmas Eve dinner with extended family, and we're running late and we're really hungry, and we hit traffic on the way there, and everyone's a little bit dysregulated, and we walk through the door, and I'm just trying to get my kids food as fast as possible. So I'm like greeting family and rushing to the food table, and I throw together this plate of food, and I turn to my child and I'm like, okay, here's your food. Let's go sit down. And my kid looked at me and said, Mom, I'm feeling really overstimulated. That was it. And I was like, oh my goodness, they're not melting down. Like they recognized before they hit the meltdown. And if I had said at that point, like, oh, whatever, just come sit down, I'm sure we would have had a meltdown. But instead I said, okay, what would help? Do you want me to help you find a quiet place to eat? Do you need to eat in the car? What would help right now? And the kid said, can we eat in the hallway? And I said, amazing. Okay, great. So
found a solution.
We pulled a chair out, we ate in the hallway, and after about 10 minutes, the kid was like, okay, I'm good now, and then went and joined the party.
See, yeah.
That's amazing.
And I feel like the fact that he knew what overstimulated was and how to tell it to me, it's because I've been modeling it. So like it's not like a one and done. It's like
right.
ongoing thing.
It takes time, but the kids are listening. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. You have the influence.
For you to say as a parent, I'm getting overstimulated, or even I feel understimulated, I'm gonna listen to music.
Yeah.
Like just using that terminology with your kids would help.
Yeah. And it helps them tune into like really, whether it's an infant, elementary school age, or a young adult, looking at their play and recreation. Like what are they really intrinsically motivated to? What are they drawn to? Whether it's listening to music, roughhouse kind of play, swinging, those kinds of things. And that's when you can really tune into that modeling. Oh, I notice when you're on that swing, like, look at you're smiling, that must feel so good, And so then again, you're planting those seeds for them to have that self-awareness in themselves, or even, with teens, like noticing, wow, when you listen to that music, you're really engaged in your assignment there, for school or whatever. And I can't do that. I can't listen to music and work at the same time, but wow, that really works for you. And so
compare and contrast.
Yes. That's so good.
Compare and contrast. That all help. It all makes a difference. We could both tell you many, as you just did, Emily, many stories where you're reminded that it does matter and that it does take effect at some point, even if they were either not noticing or being annoyed, in many cases annoyed with someone saying something or modeling it or calling you out for it, but then later realizing actually that was played a part in their development, and it comes back in a positive way. So
we
all feel
fantastic.
That. Yeah.
I love this. Okay, well, we have one final question from our community. This one's a hard one. If parents have a child that also has PDA, which pathological demand avoidance, persistent drive for autonomy, however we want to describe it, this idea is a child whose stress response seems to be very strong whenever they're asked or told to do something. For parents, I know you know that, I'm saying this for our listeners here, but for parents who have a child that either they know or they suspect does have PDA that tends to get stressed when they're asked or told to do something, do you have any suggestions? And I'll give you an example from this parent. They've said before, when their 4-year-old has been dysregulated, they know if they get their 4-year-old on the swing that they will regulate. But if they suggest or tell their kid, hey, let's go swing, you'll feel better, the kid will be like, now I'm not doing it because I feel like my autonomy has been threatened. And so this parent, she says, anything that helps is bound to be rejected if we are the ones to suggest it. So any advice for parents that are dealing with this?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously it within the whole PDA context, I would kind of go to that mindset and lens and strategy, and strategies that are helpful in general to work with someone with that profile, because it might be things like, obviously using more like declarative language, things
Okay,
that
give me examples of declarative language, really.
like, okay, yeah, well, for example, like instead of, like you said, suggesting it, we might be like, oh, I noticed there's a swing over there, and like I notice things, or the like, okay, like I see the playgrounds over here. Like we said, we're just saying what you see
I
can be a
notice, I see. Okay.
yeah, I notice, I see, or I'm putting my shoes on, something about yourself, because that way it has nothing to do with the demand to another person, but it's introducing or sort of inviting it in that way, kind of like more indirectly, as well as just things that would be like a statement about like the schedule, like, this is what we're doing now. And, during our day, these are the other things we're doing, like things that are kind of more neutral and descriptive, and that, indirectly invite instead of requesting or demanding, or, asking. So that would be something to use overall,
Okay.
just like you would for any other kind of activity you want or expect or you need them to get involved with. So that would be my initial, that's more of a broad thing, because that way you can think about it that way and maybe start to find ways. I know we were chatting before about strewing, and the idea of having options available in that child's, visible in their context that they're in the environment, so that they have them as options to gravitate toward without it being explicitly, asked to.
So what are some examples of items a parent might have at home that they could strew or, have open and available for the child to come and have as options without telling the kid to do it? I don't know if that question makes sense.
No,
but
I know exactly what you mean. There are, go ahead. But Jen, did you want to say anything about specific?
Yeah, you can do
uses
it again, that you can, think about maybe a certain time of day, or where this might come up consistently, where they always need support in the morning or something like that. That's one way of looking at it. But for example, you could do it just during unstructured playtime, depending on the age of the child. For example, at mealtime, if you notice, or in general, if you notice that heavy work, proprioceptive input really helps, maybe, and morning time is always kind of challenging, maybe the breakfast options maybe you're laying out various breakfast options, they're there, and maybe they all have a really heavy work component. There's really like crunchy, chewy options, things like that. So no matter what they gravitate towards, and again, you're playing into their intrinsic motivation, what they like, what they're likely going to choose. And so all of those options are going to provide some type of an input. You could do the same thing for recreation and play, by really putting out certain toys or laying out certain activities, all of which may contribute to, getting the input that they need. So, even something, if that, vestibular types of input, like linear movement, so going back and forth, swinging, or using a scooter or something like that, you're going to put those kinds of options available out. So you're going to kind of structure the environment in that way by having those more readily available. And so that no matter what the child or person chooses, they're going to get that input in. So you're not giving a demand, but you're strewing those things out, you're laying them out in an approach. That is one way. But yeah, as people know with PDA, the challenge is you want the person to perceive that is there, that they are making that choice. They have the autonomy there. So
I know this mom has said a situation in particular where after work/school, they're nursing the baby and the child becomes dysregulated, and there's a ton going on under their iceberg, of course, that we've worked through. But so the idea would then be in advance to have items out that would help the child with regulation, and to kind of just either visually leave them or declare that we see them, like, oh, I see a yoga ball in the corner, and then just kind of leave it. Or maybe you walk over and you touch the swing and you swing the swing and then you walk away. Is that kind of the idea here?
Yeah. And I think for everyone's going to be different, even with, as we said, even within, PDA, there's going to be, everyone's going to, be different. And there might be a certain phrase that works for someone, like maybe the I notice is like really irritating to someone, but someone else that helps them, or whether, so I think it really is going to depend once you find some of that language and the phrasing that seems to work, or the or the when, like, when are you going to say it versus let them try to figure that out a little bit? Or if you model it, does that work? Or does that really, like I said, is that equally as distressing to the child? So it's going to be so different. But once you tap into it for something else, maybe they've noticed in another part of their day that helps with their child, then that might be something to apply in the same sensory context in a different way, but in the sensory context. So I think that's where I would go with it, is like, what have you been troubleshooting that works? And then think about it for this.
That's great.
Yeah.
I have one kid, I don't know if they have PDA or not, but they do have a very strong will, and
Strong will, yeah, sure.
which is similar. And this child really likes when I say, what do you want to choose? Or anything with,
right, that could
hey,
be
you're in charge here. You're in charge of what we're doing. They really like that feeling of being the one to make the choices.
Yeah, yeah. It could be that for like as Jen said, you could proactively be thinking about the schedule of what we're going to do. Like, maybe you're built somehow without the demand being detected in that way, that you're scheduling in an opportunity to stop and do some of this movement, for example. Like, maybe it's better when it's embedded, on the drive home, it's embedded in the schedule before getting home, for as an example. Or maybe that's also challenging for that person. Maybe, I don't know, because, where that would create some friction or set the child into a threat state if that schedule is set that way. So I don't know, but putting, of course, autonomy first, and trying to find ways to do that. And I think also the observations, like when something really is working for someone, pointing that out, that like that seems really, calming to you when you do that. After the fact, you could even say it or whatever if it's too threatening in the moment, perceived as too threatening in the moment. You know what I mean?
Good clarification.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
not
You know what I
really
mean.
threatening our kids.
You know what I mean.
But not a good
No,
parent.
if it's perceived that way, then you can try it after.
Yeah.
But I think that using your connection with, like, not using, but leveraging, like, working with your connection and being responsive to your kid, and building in that autonomy is gonna do wonders for these types of activities.
Yeah, so you can just experiment with it and take your own kind of data of what's working, and parents know their kids best, and especially with something like PDA or with, we're talking about sensory differences. So just kind of trialing things and noticing, right? And then again, using that declarative language or spooning or planting those seeds as is going to work in the right moments for your child. Yep.
Fantastic.
And I was gonna say, I think it's important to say that also kids aren't supposed to know what they need and be able to go do it all the time. They're not supposed to figure it out, and they don't have to always do the thing that we see so clearly will help. They don't have to. They're figuring out, and maybe they need several thousand more opportunities to have that experience and that feeling of, and not solving the problem right away with the thing that's going to help. So that's part of it too, is really, let's release as parents for ourselves that expectation that every time this happens, we need to, they need to figure it out, or we need to figure it out with them. It doesn't always, we got to let go of those. I tell myself that all the time, letting go of some of these things that in the moment that aren't, going to happen, but in the long run, they'll, like, zoom out and know that in the long run that they'll be developing this sense not sense, but they'll be developing their senses and with the support that we're giving them in these ways.
Oh, that's a good reminder. And also why I always go back to why we need to keep our own cup really full, because it's hard. Meanwhile, it's hard if it takes your kid a long time to figure out what they need in that moment. That's a challenge. And so keeping our own cup full while we're figuring it out is extremely 100%. Important.
Yep.
Okay. This is fantastic. So let everyone know where they can find you. I know we'll have your link in the show notes for your free gift, but if they want to connect, where can they find you?
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. You can find us on the social media platforms of Facebook and Instagram. Just search for @the OT Parent Coaches. And we have a link tree on each of those sites as well. Our website is under reconstruction at the moment, so we will be launching that soon. But yeah, definitely you can connect with us there. If you put Emily, if you link our email below too, that is a very direct and easy way. We're very responsive with our email, so we'll get back to you through that as well.
Okay, sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for joining, ladies. This was fantastic.
Thank you. We always love
Thank you very much, Emily. We loved it.